Hi, everyone. Welcome to All About the Joy. I am Carmen Lisette, your host, and this is Carmen Talk. Growing up without a dad, without an actual biological father, wasn't so problematic for me. And the reason why is because if you don't know something, you can't miss it. So on one of our Friday Night Lives, where it was just me and Cynthia, we were talking about a family bush. And that's kind of this joke on the idea that our family tree is such an absolute mess that I had coined this kind of idea that it's more of a family bush, or I think Cynthia then was like, it's family weeds, you know. In my experience and all the families that I have been a part of because of the way in which I was raised, all families have some sort of mess or craziness in them. It may not be all about DNA and blood relationships or whatever, but there is not one family that is absolutely perfect. I've never met a family that was absolutely perfect. There's always something that is the nature of being human. So I appreciated so many of the comments that I got and emails that I got that were talking about, I shouldn't feel bad because XYZ. Thank you. It's so kind of you to think of me that way. But let me back up for those of you who might be new here. I lost my mom when I was 11 and a half. She never told me who my father was. She never told anyone who my father was. And I still, to this day, and I know I will never know who my father is. So she wanted to tell me. She was going to tell me when I was 16, but it just never panned out. But what was odd was when she died, we went and tried to find out through her best friends or people who knew her, people who worked with her. But she had never told anyone the story of how I came to be. And I don't know if I struggled as much as people want to believe. I tell people all the time that I should have known I was really good at improv when I was a kid, because when other kids would ask me questions about where's your dad, right? Because they would have their mom and their dad or whatever. I automatically come up with a story that he died when my mother was pregnant with me. I don't even know where it came from. I just came up with this whole story. And I had been told that he was Italian for most of my life. Some people have vague memories of what they think happened. I don't know how true it is. I'm actually not Italian. Although in my heart, I'm always going to be a little bit Italian because for so long I thought I was. But after doing DNA myself, I did all the DNAs the minute I could when they came out. And clearly he's Portuguese. That's the other half of me. And I have to tell you, learning that was the thing that helped me so much, more than I ever thought it would. So let me just back up. Growing up without a dad, without an actual biological father, wasn't so problematic for me. And the reason why is because if you don't know something, you can't miss it. And I don't know how to explain that in any other way. I don't know. Do you miss going in a spaceship to the moon? Of course you don't, because you've never done it, right? Well, I assume most everyone watching this has never been part of NASA or something, right? It's kind of that thing. It's, to me, I never had an actual father that was consistent or that was mine or that was in my life. So I don't miss what I don't have because I didn't know any different. And look, I don't feel bad about saying that. It's just the truth. I've also spoken about this, that I remember growing up, I'm Gen X, so we grew up watching like all these talk shows. And I remember Sally Jessica Raphael, she had the big glasses or whatever. And she would have people on the show crying and sobbing because they didn't know who they were. They didn't know who their father was. I would look at those shows and I'd be like, why? Well, should I be that upset? You know what I mean? I'd be so confused. Like, I don't feel that at all. So I don't have a sense of loss in that way. What was my issue and why I want to talk about this so much more is I just felt like there was such a lack of preparation from my mother's point of view. And it felt a little bit like a betrayal not to think that someday I would want to know and that you should have maybe told someone. And I think that's the bigger picture here that I want to talk about is parents and people keeping secrets from their children. And depending on your circumstance, look, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor. I feel like I say this every episode of every show that we do. But It's kind of true. Every situation is very different. But in the bulk of experience that I've had regarding seeing families who lie about stuff, who don't tell their children who their fathers are, who their parents are, that they were adopted, that they were whatever, is you're not doing anything to protect your children. You're doing everything to protect yourself from talking about the truth. And that's what I think happened with my mom. Whatever the truth was, she didn't want to deal or talk about it. And so that's why she didn't share it with even some of her best girlfriends or people that she knew enough that she could have shared that information with them. And so you end up wanting to protect yourself from dealing with whatever trauma it is that you're dealing with, whether it was a breakup or whether it was a one-night stand or whatever it was. Or maybe the person you were into is a bad person. Maybe they're they're in prison or something. That's not really about your child wanting to know and you protecting your child. That's really about you protecting yourself from having to deal with the choices that you made, right? So I get really incensed about it. I get really incensed when I hear parents or I hear people talking about how they're never going to let little Joey know or whatever. And I'm like, that's so stupid. It's so selfish and it's so wrong. Now, here's the thing. As I already said, every family and every situation is different. I've also said I'm not a therapist or a doctor. But here's the other thing, too. It's when it's age appropriate for your circumstance. But at the end of the day, especially if everybody else knows, oh my God, because the last thing you want is for your child to find out because somebody else is talking about it to somebody else. And that used to happen all the time when I was growing up. You would hear grown-ups talking and thinking they're in hushed voices or whatever. And then you would find out that little Debbie isn't really the child of so-and-so. You would be like, oh. And eventually that would come out. It would come out and everybody would know and it'd be this huge drama. So I think if you're going to keep secrets, you really have to decide, is it a secret worth keeping? Is it a secret that you're keeping because you don't want to deal with the actual truth of it? And is it a secret that eventually somebody should be able to tell your child? And if you're going to do that, prepare that you may die before you tell that child that information, and you should at least let somebody else know. And that's the mistake my mom made. And so that kind of betrayal, that bothers me more than actually not having a father or not knowing a father, if that makes any sense. I think for me, my mom was also very sick. She knew that she was sick. The possibility that she could have died or been incapacitated in some way, shape, or form was not far off the realm of what ended up happening. The disaster that she should have known could have happened did happen. She died very, very young. And with that was this secret that impacted not just my life, it impacted a lot of people's lives. And I'm going to explain why. My mom not writing a will and not making a decision about what she wanted done with everything. And we were poor, so we didn't have anything, but she had children, right? Not explaining us to someone or writing it down ended up, I think, fracturing all of us that were left behind when she moved on. And, and you see this all the time in different families. This isn't just about where I grew up. This is everywhere. People fighting over stuff, arguing over things, hating each other over things that are out of everyone's control, the blame and the hatred. But if you sit down and write down a concrete plan and you let everyone know that this is the plan, then when you do pass away, there will not be a question or a concern, or that won't be the basis of the fight or the arguments or the pain and the suffering. And so I'm really an advocate for people to have a will, to have your intentions known by other people, especially if you have nothing. Because, if you're rich and you have millions of dollars, you already have lawyers sitting down doing your wills or whatever, blah, blah. That's whatever. That's about stuffage. But if you don't have anything, but you have small little things that you want to make sure, or you have children that don't know information, you want to write these things down somewhere and let everyone know about them and how you want things to unfold. And you should always have that intention out there. It's really important, I think, so that you do no harm when you pass along. That's my thing. If you're going to have a will, or you're going to have your intentions, or you're going to have all these secrets, then the least you can do is make sure that when you do pass on, all we're suffering is that you've left. We're grieving that you're gone, but we're not going to now grieve all the bad decisions that you made along the way. And I know it sounds like I don't love my mom. I do. I loved my mom so much. I still think of her. I love her every day. I respect her, but I have enough distance and enough ability to know that she also made mistakes. She was a real human being, a real woman. And it was a different time. Still not an excuse, but it was a different time. And people didn't write everything on social media. Everybody didn't do all these things, but we're here now. So it's like, how do you, as a parent, as a grandparent, as a young person who's thinking about getting married and whatever, how do you make sure that you don't make some of the same mistakes that affect everyone? Because me not knowing my dad didn't just affect me. Me not knowing my dad affected my mother's other children. It affected all of our relationships. It affected the way in which I deal with my friends. I lied most of my childhood about who my father was because I didn't want to deal with being made fun of or people saying things about me or people feeling sorry for me. So it is such a huge, big deal to lie to your children about who they are and where they come from. I think it's a huge mistake. So one of the questions that came that I thought was really interesting was, how did I deal with men as I was getting older and in relationships? And I'm laughing because they wrote, if you're not gay. Okay, I'm not gay. I'm an ally. But I think it's probably the same. I don't think my sexuality has anything to do with how I deal with having or not having a parent. So I think that's really important to say. I think sexual orientation and who you like probably has less to do with your relationships with your parents. Again, not a doctor, but I just thought that was a funny, please don't be upset as I'm answering this question, but I wanted to point that out in a kind way as much as possible. I had a lot of men in my life. They weren't my actual fathers and they weren't consistently in my life throughout my entire life. But the blessing that I had was that everywhere along the way, I had male figures that were authority figures. So whether it was in school, I had Mr. Bernanzani, who was like the 3rd grade or 4th grade teacher. I forget what grade he taught, but he always looked out for me. I also had, even going to camp, I went to Boston College day camp, and Dennis Scala was one of the quarterbacks on the football team, and he was one of the counselors. And it's so weird, right? Because I know they're not that much older than me, but when you're like 11 and 12 years old, or somebody in college seems like they're so old. But I went to overnight camp as well. I also had the community in the neighborhood that I lived in. You couldn't walk down the street without somebody telling you what you could and could not do, the male figures in your life. And I wrote about it in my book, primarily men that were in my life that kind of behaved in a way that I looked up to them. They weren't necessarily dad figures, but they were men who I could look up to and who acted very protectively. I remember going to the day camp and the camp counselor, Dennis, I used to wear a long chain and it was given to me by one of my teachers and I loved this chain so much, but I didn't want to go in the pool with it. And so he was like, well, I'll wear it. Give it to me. And he would wear it. And I remember being like, because that's what a dad would do. There's all these little moments that I remember. I was talking to Cynthia about always thinking that Chico, the bus driver, was my dad because my mom would let me get on the bus and I could go with him alone, even though I was so little at the time. And I was like, that must be my father, you know? So I already at a young age had kind of this need to see men as authority figures, to see them as people that I would look up to. I don't know if that's a cultural thing. I don't know if that was an intentional thing on my mother's part, but I always looked towards men who were good people and who treated me well and were protective. And so I say all that because I think to me, that's what I think partially a dad in my life would have been like, but I don't know because I never had it. So I don't think that my single status as a woman today or any of my relationships with men in a romantic way is any more or less affected by me not having a father, as I've seen some of my other friends who are also single who did have fathers. You know what I mean? I don't know to what extent. I think I probably revere men in a very different way than a lot of other people because I did not have a father. So I always think about, like, I love the whole girl dad thing. I think that's so cute, you know what I mean? And adorable. And those are the things I missed. I yearn for that, right? And I'll never have that because I'm not a kid anymore. But I love that kind of idea where there's that special relationship. So that's something I never had, right? That's something I never had. But I adore that. I love that idea. But I think I am a better person. People don't like to talk about this part of it. I think I'm a better person today because I had to figure it out. I had to figure out how not to have a mom and how not to have a dad. I'm the person I am today, unfortunately, because of that circumstance. Now, I'm not saying I would have been a worse person or a better person if my mom had lived and I knew who my dad was. It just would have been different circumstances. I still think I'd be a good and decent person, I hope. But what I'm saying is not having a father has not made me bitter or angry or hateful or anything towards men. If anything, it's probably the opposite. And that's why I get so disappointed when I meet so many men or I see so many men who I know are better than the way they're behaving. You know what I mean? Because there is such a beauty in a real man, you know, and men who have figured it out, men who are nurturers as well as protectors, men who are able to see the beauty and brilliance and the independence in a woman and not be intimidated or not be, I don't know what the right word is, but I love when I see a man who doesn't compete with a woman or doesn't think a woman is trying to be manly because she's being independent and being fiercely a woman. And that's kind of, when I think about the perfect man and even the perfect father, it's that father and that man that embraces that and lifts that child up or that young woman up, or those are the dreams I have of what my father might have been like. And so it's just such an interesting conversation to have. No one's actually ever asked me such a question. So thank you so much for asking. I hope I'm answering the questions right. I do think that it's important, if I haven't said it enough already, that if you can admit to yourself that secrets, the problem with secrets is that we lie to ourselves why we're keeping the secret. If you can admit that the reason why you're keeping the secret is because you are ashamed by whatever it is, I don't know, you slept with so-and-so and you don't know his name and I don't know. I think about all the different things could have happened with my mom. I think it was a one-night stand. I hope it was a wonderful time. I don't know. But why else wouldn't she share who he was? Now, and someone asked me, did he not know about me? I don't know. I hear stories, but I heard for the longest time that I was Italian for most of my life. And it's just, I don't know how much validity there is in a lot of stories that I heard through the grapevine. So I don't know if he knew about me. Even still, even if he didn't know, even if he did know about me, if my mom had told him to not come near us and he respected that, I'm not going to be mad about it. I like to think in my perfect world that it was a one-night stand and maybe she didn't know his name and maybe he doesn't even know he had a kid. And maybe I do have half brothers and sisters out there on his side that kind of look like me or whatever, because I don't look like anybody. And I kind of think about that. I hope it was a wonderful time for her or whatever. And then she chose to have me and I'm grateful and blessed for that, you know. But I always wonder what it was that she might have been ashamed of, right? Or why she would have kept the secret and not have told anybody. And I think when you're a parent, and I'm not a parent, you have to at least come to terms with why you're making that decision and be honest about it. If you're not going to tell someone the truth about who their father is, just realize you're doing it to protect yourself, more than likely, not really about protecting that child. And if you can at least admit that, then you're going to come to it from a different point of view. You're not going to come to it from a place of hate or anger or bitterness. And I think that matters. because I asked my mother twice who my father was. And each time she could have chosen to be like, don't talk to me about him ever again. And I could have, but there was never an anger to it. It was about, I will let you know when the time is right. I knew it was something important and something that when I was age appropriate, she would tell me. It wasn't an anger or bitter or a hatred to whoever that man was. And I think that matters. I think it matters how you project yourself as a person to a child when you have a secret. And part of it is admitting that if you're going to keep the secret, it's about you, not really about your child in most cases. I also just want to say, I didn't realize there was so much interest in things regarding family and fathers and growing up without a father and what that means. I am happy to answer as many questions as I can if it helps anyone process through and walk through this situation. I do get teary-eyed and I do have an affinity for loving things like Field of Dreams, which is one of my favorite movies. Part of it is a big, huge part of it is that relationship that Kevin Costner has at the end of the movie. If you haven't seen it, I am about to give away a big part of the movie, so please move away from this video. But at the end, when he says, he asks his dad if you want to have a catch, I know it makes everyone cry. I know it does. And for me, it's really about that. I would have loved the idea of having a moment with a parent, not just my dad, but even my mom, because I didn't have that relationship with my mom either. To have that ability to spend time with either one of them really breaks my heart, because it was a different time back then and my mother worked all the time. And the only time I really remember seeing her was at night when she went to sleep, right? We would watch Johnny Carson together as long as I could get up to go to school, or when she was in the hospital. So I feel like, whenever I see that movie and that love is so intense when he just asks that question. And he knows, his father knows, right? The ghost knows. And they play catch. It just, oh. And I think for everyone brings to the table whatever they bring to the table to that piece of art. But yeah, that's what it is for me. And then there's a song that will throw me to tears all the time, which is Luther Vandross's song, Dance with My Father. And it's not even the part about me dancing with my father. It's the idea of my mother dancing with my father, because there's that verse in it where he says something like, I don't know what the right verse is, but I'll write it here. But it's all she wants is to dance with my father again. Because I wonder if, especially because I'm an older woman now and I've outlived the age my mother lived, right? Because she died so young. I know for myself, like she must have yearned to have a man in her life. And I can't imagine having a child from a man that you might have been in love with. So that song will throw me. You could play that anywhere and I will like crumble and just, So there are things like that I have a lot to do with not knowing who my father is. But for the most part, I've had wonderful men in my life, both as father figures and also romantically. I'm probably friends with most of the people I've ever dated. I don't blame not having a father as to why I'm single, because again, most of my friends know their fathers and they're all single or in miserable marriages. So I don't think it's that. And I think I'm a pretty decent, happy human being, even though I've never known and will never know who my father is. And a lot of that has to do with those tiny little pearls that I just shared with you. One of them being that whatever happened, I didn't think it was a bad thing. My mother did love me, and I was loved as a kid even after she died. In spite of the situation, I was loved by so many people, and I was taken care of by so many people along the way. Even though, if you read my book and you know my story, there's a lot of tragedy in it, but the thread through it all is being loved. And I think that's what every kid wants, and that's what every kid needs, is to know that they are worthy, that they are loved, that they are precious, and that they are a possibility. I've always known that I had possibility. And so if I would give any advice to anybody who's an adult and having children, it's always, always tell the truth to yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. Make sure that you love your children no matter what, no matter how they came into the world, no matter how they came to you. because then you will raise the most incredible, wonderful human beings who hopefully will pass that along. Yeah. So anyways, thank you for hanging out. Thank you for the questions. And remember, at the end of the day, it really is all about the joy. See you next time. Bye. Thanks for stopping by All About the Joy. Be better and stay beautiful, folks. Have a sweet day.